Yes, so we're looking at Perek Chamishi, and as I indicated, there is a simple pshat and a more complicated pshat. The simple pshat is, how do you elicit chesed from Hashem? By doing chesed, right? That's the normal midah keneged midah. I do acts of loving kindness. I bring Hashem's kindness into the world. That itself is a relatively straightforward idea. And on that Pashut level, the Ramak lists 8 types of chesed that one can be engaged in. Again, just to list it very quickly, the first is the chesed of literally taking care of a baby. A baby is helpless, a baby is dependent, and we have to give the baby chesed just so the baby will survive. And as I indicated the other day, human beings have probably the longest dependency period of any other creature, right? Most animals can get relatively independent pretty quickly. Human beings may take 10 years, 20 years, 30 years to be able to be on their own, etc. And part of that is because God wanted to create a mechanism where we get habituated in kindness. We have to show this kindness over and over and over again. And I had mentioned Rav Dessler's famous Yesod, and Rav Dessler's famous Yesod is that it's not just you give because you love, which is obvious, but the process of giving can create the love. The love comes from the giving itself. Because when you give, you're putting yourself into that other person, and therefore you love that person because in a sense you put something into that person. And therefore in a sense you love yourself, you love that person. In fact, many say that this is the psychology of why, as a general rule, there are exceptions, as a general rule, the love of a parent for a child is greater than the love of a child for a parent. Right? Parents love children more than children love parents. Again, there are certainly exceptions, but this is the normal way the world works. And part of it is because the parents gave more to the child, and therefore the process of giving generates a tremendous power of love. There's another reason, though, that says why you have that distinction. He says, because go back to the first love. The first human love that existed was between husband, wife, and parent-child, meaning Adam and Chava did not have earthly parents. So love of child came before the love of parent. In other words, Adam and Chava loved their children. Adam and Chava did not have a human parent that they could love, and therefore the love of a parent to a child came into the world first before the love of a child for a parent. Because the love of a child for a parent came only when the next generation, was old enough to feel love. When Shais was a baby, they were not aware. So the parental love of Adam and Chava towards their child was earlier than the love that the child had towards the parent, right? That's part of the reason for that dynamic as well. So the first chesed is the chesed we give to babies. The second refers very specifically to bris milah, which you could subsume it, but he counts it separately for Kabbalistic reasons I'll get into later. The third is Bikur Cholim, visiting the sick. And you'll remember that Bikur Cholim has 2 purposes. One is to be sure that the needs of the sick person are taken care of, whether it's food, medicine, medical care, cleanliness. And the second is the psychological idea that the person is not alone and people are thinking about them. You know, Rav Moshe Feinstein has a whole tshuva, are you Makayim Bikur Cholim by a telephone? In other words, do you have to personally visit, or can you do it by telephone? I guess today we could ask, what about Zoom? Even if telephone is not good, would Zoom be good? And the like, live chat or whatever it would be, Skype. But again, I tell you the truth, if you look at the logic of the mitzvah, then why shouldn't telephone be good? I mean, the point basically is to show a person that you're thinking about them, that they're not alone, that they're not abandoned. So a phone call is a good thing too. For a person to say, "Oh, I'm not going to call because Bikur Cholim requires a personal visit, and I'm not going to make a personal visit, so why should I call?" I mean, that's not a sensible position. That's like saying, if I can't do it at the highest level, I'm not going to do it at all. Where does that leave the person? Right. So that's a Bikur Cholim. The fourth one is tzedakah to the poor. And there, I'll remind you of the Rambam's idea that the highest level of tzedakah is to give somebody a job, that they're able to become self-sufficient. And the Rambam also emphasizes that the attitude and the respect by which you give tzedakah is even more significant than the amount that you give. You can give a large amount to somebody in a very disrespectful way, or you can give lesser, but in a kavodika way. So it is the kavod and the respect that you show a person that counts even more than the money. The fifth was hachnasas orchim. And as I indicated just b'chazara very, very quickly, that hachnasas orchim is not referring to the social interactions I have with my friends. I mean, that might be nice as friendships, but if I simply invite, guys in my shir, I don't mean a Rebbe, but I mean if, say you're married and you invite your chavrusa to your house, that's lav dafka hachnasas orchim. Hachnasas orchim are for people who are strangers, meaning they're traveling, they're not in their regular home, or people who are lonely, unconnected, newcomers. That's what hachnasas orchim is, people who are not well established in a certain environment. And once again, they're likely to feel lonely. They're likely to feel disconnected. So that's an inyan of showing them this hospitality. The Chazon Ish has a very interesting essay. He has like what you might call a thought experiment. He talks about the idea that very, very often we do chesed, not necessarily to help the other person, but it kind of augments our ego. It makes us feel good that I'm doing chesed. Now, granted, that's still a good motivator. I mean, Chazal say we should do Torah and mitzvahs even not lishma, because by doing it not lishma, we come to lishma, but still, it is not the highest level of chesed. The highest level of chesed is when it's not feeding your ego. And he gives a thought experiment to differentiate between true chesed and chesed that augments my ego. And he says the following. He gives this example. Let's imagine that you are a person who loves to have guests for Shabbos, right? You love to have guests for Shabbos. So every Friday night, you look around for a new face that you can invite to your house. So let's say, you had slim pickings. There was like nobody new and you didn't have any guests and you're heartbroken and you're looking around and finally you see a new person that you didn't notice before. And you run over to him and you say, Reb Yidz, it would be such an honor to have you to my house for Shabbos. Can I invite you for Shabbos? And let's say the person says, oh, thank you very much, but just 1 minute ago, so-and-so invited me. And let's assume so-and-so is fine. So the Chazon Ish says, freeze the frame. What is going through your mind at that moment? Are you happy or are you unhappy? So the Chazon Ish says, this is a bit of a tough standard. He says, this is kind of the litmus test. Because if your motivation in inviting a person is you are worried about them, are they taken care of? Do people care about them? Are they going to be lonely? Are they going to be alone? You will be happy that they have a good place, even though it's not you, because it doesn't have to be you. The point is, are they taken care of? Baruch Hashem. But if the idea is, I always have guests in my house, no matter what, it's a matter of me, not him, me, then I'm going to be a little upset. Why didn't I have that opportunity? So the Chazon Ish actually says that you can see that since it would actually be very common that people would feel bad about missing their guests, you see the Chazon Ish says how strong the egotism component is. even in our chesed. Because chesed, in its purest form, is indifferent whether it's me or whether it's somebody else. Because chesed, to use brisker terminology, chesed is focused on the chefza, not the gavra, meaning chesed is not focusing on me doing it, it's focusing on the need being met. And if the need is met, I'm just as happy if it's me or somebody else. Doesn't have to be me. You know, they tell, this is me'inyan li'inyan, but it's a beautiful story. You know, the Panovich HaRav, Rav Shlomo Yosef Kahaneman, who was nifter, I believe, 67 or 68, a while ago already. You know, the Panovich HaRav was the only community Rav of Lithuania, of Lita, that survived the Holocaust. There were 800 Rabbanim of Kehilos in Lita, and 799 of them died in the Holocaust. The Panovich HaRav was the only survivor. And because of this, probably other reasons as well, you know, the Panovich HaRav was obsessed with the building of Torah. He basically asked himself, why did Hashem give me life? Why am I alive? Everybody died. And he saw that he had a mission to rebuild that which was destroyed. Panovich Yeshiva, but it wasn't only yeshivas. He started yeshivas. And he started Beis Yaakovs, and he started chadorim, and hospitals, and orphanages. Everything. He was totally involved in creating mostos. In fact, he was very, very clever. Sometimes the story goes, there was a non-religious person who was very hostile. But he gave him money on the condition that he create a Jewish school where the students don't wear kippos. He was confident the Panovich HaRav couldn't take money under those circumstances. He took the money and he created a Beis Yaakov, created a girls' school. Okay. Actually, that's pretty dumb on the part of the guy who gave the money, but whatever it is, but the Panovich HaRav was able to do that. The Panovich HaRav once said that the greatest sacrifice he made for the Jewish people were all of the Sfarim that he could have written. The Panovich HaRav was a big gadol and a big, big, big Talmid Chacham. But most of his time, he was collecting money and building mostos. So the actual teaching of Panovich was Rav Shach and Rav Shmuel Rozovsky. The Panovich HaRav was the head, but he was not involved in the actual teaching because he was going all over the world. And he said he could have written many, many Sfarim of Chidushim. But he gave it up to sanctify Hashem and to be marbitz, to allow the great Harbatzas Torah. I remember very vividly, and I only saw this once in my life, and I've never seen it again. I came to Ner Yisrael as a high school student, 9th grader. I think it was 68 or 67. And the Panovich HaRav died that same year. So when the Panovich HaRav died, so the whole yeshiva and the high school, called the Mechina, was called the high school, we all gathered, and the Rosh Yeshiva gave a hesped. Rosh Yeshiva knew the Panovich HaRav, or Ruderman. And I didn't know Yiddish that well then, and I was kind of falling asleep in the chair as the Rosh Yeshiva was speaking and giving a long hesped in Yiddish. But all of a sudden, I woke up suddenly. He banged on the bima. He said, all of us should sit on the ground. In Avelos, for the Panovich HaRav, we should get off our chairs and literally sit on the floor. I had never seen that before, and I have not seen it since. But that was how great the Panovich HaRav was, that the Rosh Yeshiva said we all should sit on the floor. Now, the first moon launch was also 1968 or something. So there was an immediate discussion. People began to discuss, can there be life on other planets? Is there life on the moon? Is there life on other planets? Is there life on Mars? So the Satmar Rav said, this was shortly after the Panovich HaRav died, but the Satmar Rav said, he doesn't know any Makar in Chazal that clearly indicate life on other planets. But he said he knows for sure there's no life on other planets, because if there was life on other planets, the Panovich HaRav would be collecting money from them. And if he didn't go to Mars, there's nothing there. He said to him, he considered that to be a tremendous raya. So the Panovich HaRav was a legendary funds collector. Because he was a gadol b'Torah, but he's also a sweet person, a funny person, a humorous person. He could mix with everybody. He could mix with gedolim, because he was a gadol, and he could mix with a common person and even a non-religious person. He made people feel very, very comfortable. So the story goes that he once came to Chicago to do fundraising. And this was back in the 50s, maybe the early 50s. And in those days, they didn't have jet planes. They had propeller. So a flight from Israel to Chicago then took around 16, 17 hours. It was longer than it is today. He was already an older man, not in the best of health, but he took all the way to Chicago to collect money because, he did well. And he's about to talk. And in the audience was a mashulach from the Novardika yeshiva in Bnei Brak, which was a much smaller yeshiva. And the Novardika person also came to collect money. When he saw the Panovich HaRav, he turned white because he figured, there's no way I'm going to compete. The Panovich HaRav is going to get all the money in town, and I'm going to get nothing. So the person resigned himself to the idea, okay, this is not a fundraising night for me, but I'll listen to the shir and I'll enjoy the shir like everybody else. So he sat with no expectation of getting any money at all. Because how am I going to compete? I'm going to compete with the Panovich HaRav. Can't do that. So he's sitting, and the Panovich HaRav Kedarkai gives a gewaldige talk full of Torah and full of Musar and full of Hashkafa and full of stories and even jokes. And, he has everybody eating out of his hand, so to speak, and everyone's going to write a big check. And at the end of the talk, the Panovich HaRav says, Rabbosai, I know you're very generous. There's a wonderful man here from another yeshiva in Bnei Brak, Novardika yeshiva. It's a very, very fine yeshiva. So the Panovich HaRav said, anything you would have given to me, give to him. Give your checks to him, because this is a very, very worthy cause. Suffice it to say that this was the most successful day for this Meshulach in history. He had never gotten as much money as he got that day because he was getting the money that would have gone to the Panovich HaRav. So he goes to the Panovich HaRav afterwards and he thanks him and he says, I'm so grateful, but I really don't understand. You came all the way from Eretz Yisrael to Chicago to collect money, and you just gave all the money to another yeshiva. I mean, how could you do it? It doesn't make sense. And the Panovich HaRav said to him, I don't know what you mean, another yeshiva. He says, we're not in competition here. We're working for the same boss, and we're on the same team. So if I could collect enough money, let's say, that 20 people can learn for a month, why do I care if the 20 people are under the Panovich or base medrash or the Novardik base medrash? The ikar is that 20 people are able to learn Torah. It's not a competition. Now, the truth is, this is a very rare attitude even among great Rosh Yeshivas. You really needed an exceptional person. But he saw there was no difference between his yeshiva and some other yeshiva. The idea is the Torah should be learned. Chesed is the same way, the Chazon Ish says. Doesn't have to be me. I just want to be sure that people are taken care of. People are not neglected. The ego of me versus somebody else, that's already shalol lishma. Now again, do mitzvahs, do chesed even not lishma, because you'll come to lishma, for sure. But one should at least be realized how powerful is the ego drive within us. I remember when my son was in kindergarten in Silver Spring. So, they have the Shabbos Abba. It was a, co-ed kindergarten. So, Shabbos Abba, Shabbos Ima. They take the two kids, and one is the father, one is the mother, and or sometimes they give an award to the best student or whatever it is. So I remember, I don't remember if it was a Shabbos Abiyim or it was Best Student Award or something, but I remember he came home one day and he was so excited, because he was saying his best friend Mayor was like the best student of the week, and he was so excited. So I was thinking about it, I didn't say, but I was thinking, what are you so excited about? It wasn't you, you know. But then I realized what a sweet thing it was, that his simcha in someone else being honored was just as sweet to him as the simcha of he would have been honored. So, right? And that's, that's really a wonderful, Baruch Hashem, he's still a wonderful, wonderful kid in that way. That the notion of, you finished a Masechta, I'm happy. You got engaged, I'm happy. You have a child, I'm happy. Maybe for whatever reason it's not my time yet. For whatever the reason. But just because it's not my time yet, just because I didn't finish the Masechta, or I'm still not engaged, or I don't have children yet, why should that take away the joy that I feel for you? Because the ikar is that good things should happen to people. It's that way with Torah. Doesn't have to be my yeshiva, it can be another yeshiva. It's that way in chesed. It doesn't have to be me, as long as the person is taken care of. And it's that way in all of the brachos of life. I don't know if you're familiar with a magazine that's been defunct for a long time, but it was a very, very popular magazine in the yeshiva world, the Jewish Observer. Maybe you've heard of it. It's been discontinued for many years now already. But the editor, the retired editor of Nissen Walpin, Zichrono Livracha, actually lived here in Arzei Abira. He used to daven in Or Sameach. He just died a few years ago, but he was the editor for more than 30 years. And the Jewish Observer was the magazine for the yeshiva world. This is before there was Mishpacha magazine and all those other things. There was the Jewish Observer. We weren't allowed to have Time or Newsweek or U.S. News and World Report, but Jewish Observer was our magazine. So one of the things the Jewish Observer used to do is they used to have open letters, meaning it's like if you had a taina against somebody and it was of a general interest, you would write an anonymous letter to an anonymous person. No names were used at all, and you would express your grievance. So a common example would be an anonymous letter to my neighbor who talks during davening. And it would be a long thing about how I can't daven, I have a wife that's dying of cancer, and this is my time to pray to God, and because of, you're talking, make people guilty. Because you're talking, I can't concentrate. And who knows if you, okay, whatever, you get what it is. It was a way of giving tochacha and musar on inyanim that were thought to be of general interest. I mean, they wouldn't just take a private thing, mamish, but thing like talking during davening and the like. So I remember more than once over the years, there was a public letter to women who spend too much time talking about their kids in front of other women who don't have children. So let's imagine a scenario where you have a woman that's been married for a number of years, doesn't have children, and she's sitting at a chasna or something with other women, and all the women are talking about their kids. That's what mothers talk about. Mothers will often talk about their children in different ways. And this woman's claim was, it is very, very painful for you to always be talking about your children in front of me who doesn't have children. It's like you're rubbing salt in my wounds and you're being insensitive. Or on a variation of that, when young girls who have just gotten engaged and they're sitting with their roommate who's not yet engaged and they're talking about their chasans or whatever it is. Well, once again, that's very hurtful because I'm not engaged. They tend to come from the women. I imagine that similar letters might be written for men, but these letters came from the women. So one of the things that I think one should think about is this. I do have an achrayus to be very, very sensitive to someone else's feelings. I shouldn't, as it were, just talk about my kids or talk about my engagement to people that are going through difficult times. On the other hand, the same way that I might have the achrayus not to be so effusive, I think they have the achrayus to kind of understand that when a yid is given a bracha from Hashem, it is not just a simcha for them, it's a simcha for all of us. I should rejoice in the children that people have. I should rejoice in the engagements that people have. I should rejoice in the successes that people have. I shouldn't try to create a world where if it's not about me, I just resent. I resent your success. I resent that, you have this and I don't have this. You see, it's the exact opposite of the notion of trying to take your ego out of all of this. Okay, an amazing thing. Like the story with my son. Have simcha in, Mayor getting the award, even if it wasn't you. See, I already was a grown-up, so I was already spoiled. If it's not about me, what are you so happy about? Whatever it is. But the authentic feeling of a child is a very pure feeling, in which there's a certain simcha and excitement in other people also getting that. Now people say, well, but don't Chazal say kinas sofrim? It is the jealousy of Torah scholars that increases wisdom. Meaning I should be jealous, I should be competitive. So you have to understand that there are different aspects of competition. If it's a competition that, you're doing so good, so I'm going to try to imitate you, I'm going to try to emulate you, that's a good thing. But if it's begrudging somebody's success, that is a negative thing. There is nothing positive in begrudging, in feeling saddened that somebody was matzliach in life. That should be my simcha. So this goes back, I'm just elaborating a little bit on the notion of what Gemilas Chesed is. All right, so again, so far we have, one second, our 5 categories: taking care of babies, number 1. Number 2 is circumcision. Number 3, bikur cholim. Number 4, tzedakah li'aniyim. Number 5, hachnasas orchim. Okay, that's number 5. Number 6 is esek hachai im hameis, taking care of the dead. Right, this is chesed shalemes, because you're not going to get anything back. And that is why those who are osek with the dead are called chevra kadisha. They are the holy assembly because they're osek in gemilas chasadim shel emes. The 7th is hachnasas kala. Now, 6 and 7 are worthwhile to look at together. Not because getting married is like dying, I don't mean to suggest that correlation. But these are the 2 activities where Chazal say you're mevatel Torah. We are mevatel Torah learning to bury the dead, and we are mevatel Torah learning to take a kala to the chuppah. And without repeating everything I said, but you'll recall that according to the Nitziv, those are actually very, very limited. It only means if the funeral procession is going right by me, I should join it. If the chasna is right by me, I should join it. It doesn't necessarily mean I go out of town unless my presence is very, very much appreciated, which makes the mitzvah a mitzvah that nobody else can do, and that would allow me to be mevatel Torah. It's interesting that the Gra has an ingenious remes to this din of the Gemara. The Gemara does not give you any source. Like, how do you know? It says, we're mevatel Talmud Torah lachnosas kala ulavoya sames. We are mevatel Talmud Torah to bring the kala to the chuppah and to bury the dead. The Gemara in Megillah says that, but the Gemara in Megillah does not give you any source for it. So listen to the Vilna Gaon source. Do you remember there's one of the most famous and beautiful passages in Koheles, Shlomo HaMelech's meditation on the futility of life is La Kol Zman. It's even famous in English. In fact, maybe it's more famous in English. For everything there is a time. A time for this, and a time for that, and a time for that. Everything has a time. So normally, it's prefaced with Lamed, 2. It says, Ace, right? Ace, Lahashlich Avanim, right? A time to throw stones. V'ace Lichnos Avanim, right? To bring in, to gather the stones. Ace Lachashos, a time to be silent. V'ace Lidaber, and a time to speak. In other words, it always has the preface la, which means to. A time to do this, a time to do something else. There are only 2 of them where there's no lamed. Ace Sefod, a time to eulogize. Ace Rekod, a time to dance. Now, grammatically, that breaks the pattern. It could have said exactly with the lamed. It could have said, Ace Lispod. That would have been perfectly fine. Ace Lispod, a time to eulogize the dead. The Ace Lir Code, and a time to dance. In other words, it could have had the lamed, and yet, for some reason, there's no lamed there. It doesn't say Ace Lispod. It says Ace Sefod. And it doesn't say Ace Lir Code. It says Ace Rikot. Why is there no lamed? So says the Vilna Gaon, Shlomo HaMelech is merames to you that when it comes to Sefod, which is eulogizing the dead, and when it comes to Rikod, which is dancing at a chasna, there is no lamed. Lamed is limud. There is no learning, meaning there is no lamed for the activities of Sefod and Rikod. So the Vilna Gaon says Shlomo HaMelech is encoding in the way he wrote Koheles that you're mevatel Talmud Torah for those 2 activities, right? Ace Sefod, v'ace Rikod. Of course, there are 2 others. I'm not sure how he's going to interpret that because the very last 2 also don't have a lamed. It says Ace Milchama, v'ace Shalom. So it doesn't say Ace La Milchama. So maybe that means, what does it mean? It means when it comes for a war to defend Am Yisrael, there's no learning. Okay, I don't want to go there, but okay. But just thinking out loud, you know, could that be the interpretation, right? But, okay, so again, I mean, obviously you're not gonna draw halachic conclusions from this type of drush, but it's interesting that based on the Gra's interpretation of Ace Sefod and Ace Rikod, you might say the same thing by Ace Milchama. What about Shalom? Ace Shalom? Okay, that I don't know. They're there for sure. When there's Shalom, for sure you're supposed to learn. So I'm not sure why there'd be no lamed there, but maybe it's a parallelism. When you don't have a lamed for one, you don't have a lamed for the other. Okay, so that's 6 and 7. Eis HaChayim Ames, Levaya, taking care of the dead. And the 7th is Kala L'chuppah. Now, it's interesting. I once asked Rebbitzin an interesting question about this. Making a wedding is very expensive. Now, Baruch Hashem, in Eretz Yisrael, a chasna per se is much cheaper. I mean, there'd be other expenses like buying a dira, that may be $1,000,000 shekel. But the actual weddings tend to be simpler. But in America, standard Orthodox weddings are very, very, very expensive. I mean, you're talking about minimum 10,000, and could easily turn in 25, 30,000. And if you're rich, even more. I'm talking about middle class weddings. Very, very, very expensive. Amazing. Because you have to have a lot of people, and you have to have whatever. So my question was this. I asked somebody a question. I said, listen, you're talking about a couple that doesn't have a lot of money. If they're doing learning in Kollel, for sure they don't have, but whatever it is, even if they're not Kollel, they're in school or they're starting off. He says, why do we make big weddings at all? What's the purpose of a big wedding? I mean, make a wedding with 10 people, and the chassan can be one of the 10. So you can make nine people and the chassan, and serve, hot dogs. And then you have $25,000 that instead of wasting it on a one-night stand, give them $25,000, the money you would spend on a wedding. Doesn't it make more sense to kind of skip the wedding? I mean, you have to have a halachic wedding. You have to have a minyan, right? So that much you have to have. Have a minyan, and give the money to the couple, and the like. Like, does it make sense to have a wedding? A wedding is a one-night thing. So I thought this way for a long time. I mean, I didn't practice it, but I did like everyone else did. But I thought, what's the purpose of fancy weddings? They don't really make sense. So the Rebbetzin told me that there is a purpose, because when people get married, they're often very scared. This is a major life decision. And they're not sure if they're ready. They're not sure if they're mature enough. They're not even sure if they chose the right person. And when a lot of people get together and give them a send-off, it psychologically fortifies them that they're in a good place and they made a right decision. So it's not just the one night of the flowers and the band. It gives them a psychological boost that gives them the strength to kind of go ahead and persevere. And that was an interesting idea. I remember that idea, that there may be reasons for fancy weddings. I mean, it doesn't have to be elaborate. It doesn't have to be like super rich or anything, but there may be a reason for a bigger deal than just, 10 people, eating hot dogs and then, forget about it. Because psychologically it lifts people's spirits. And therefore one has to understand that the inyan of hachnosas kala is to give them confidence. That's one of the inyanim, that they're making the right step. Right? To give them that confidence. That's part of it as well. And that's why we have the famous machlokas Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Right? That thing that we say, we dance and we say, Ketzad Meraktim, different nigunim for it. How do you dance in front of the kala, right? So this is a Mishnah in Kesuvos. Right? What do you say when you dance in front of the kala? So Beis Shammai says, very strict, you got to be honest. Now, I assume that even Beis Shammai didn't mean if she's not attractive, you say she's not attractive, but it means, but don't say she's beautiful if she's not beautiful. As Beis Shammai says, be honest in your praises. Beis Hillel says no matter what. We say, Kala no'eh v'chasuda. No'eh, she is beautiful, v'chasuda, and she is pious and righteous. Meaning, maybe it's true, maybe it's not true, or maybe it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If people say you're righteous and good, you'll become righteous and good, right? But Beis Hillel says you got to build up. And he says an example. If somebody buys something and they're stuck with it, okay, again, I understand for marriage this may not be the best analogy, but Beis Hillel uses it. He says, it's not your job to disparage the purchase once he's stuck with it. You got to build it up. Like somebody bought a car that's a clinker, or clunker, whatever the phrase is. If he could return it or whatever, that's one thing. But if he's stuck with it, there's a mitzvah to let him look at it in a positive way. And therefore, Beis Hillel says, your job is to, build the person up, the chassan up, the kala up, and everything else. Okay. Now, the last one, the eighth, is, again, this is actually paralleling the Mishnah of Birchas HaTorah, Havoas Shalom Bein Adam L'Chaverei, to bring peace between people. People have machlokas. Sometimes the machlokas is hot machlokas. They insult each other. They express their hatred for each other. Other times the machlokas is cold. Resentments, grudges. We haven't spoken for 20 years. we're in a state of Cold War or hot war. If I could be an instrumentality to create reconciliation, Havas Shalom Bein Adam L'Chaverei, that is one of the greatest chasadim that I can do, to bring shalom between people. This was, Pirkei Avos tells us, the great quality of Aaron. Aaron was Ohev Shalom, a lover of peace, a pursuer of peace. And Avos Rabbi Nassan gives the examples, famous examples of a husband and wife were fighting. He would go over to the wife and say, oh, your husband told me how sorry he is, even though the husband didn't say that. And the wife, he would then go over to the husband and say, your wife told me how sorry she is. And each one thought the other one was sorry, so they went over and they got reconciled. Right? And this is Aaron. And Aaron was so great in this, that when Aaron HaKohen died, the mourning and the pain in Am Yisrael was even greater than when Moshe died. Because when Moshe died, it says, Beis Yisrael cried. With Aaron, it emphasizes, call Beis Yisrael. Because many people didn't have a connection. Moshe was the greatest Navi who ever lived. But the average person didn't necessarily have a shaychus to Moshe Rabbeinu. Just like sometimes we don't feel necessarily so close to the greatest Gedolim. You know, we never met them, we never spoke to them. Aaron was a man of the people. Aaron was involved in people's everyday life. So people felt a stronger connection emotionally to Aaron, because Aaron was the Ohev Shalom, the lover of peace, the pursuer of peace. And then the Mishnah goes on, Ohev es Habrios, he loved all of Hashem's creations, umakarven l'Torah, and he brought them to Torah. And the Chazam Sofer explains, and this is Pashut Pshat, through his love, he brought them to Torah. That is how he was makar of them. He was not makar of them by musar and by tochacha and by criticism. He was makar of them by the love that he showed them. That they want to be like him. They want to be like him. And but the first thing that the Mishnah says is that Aaron was Mevi Shalom, Ohev Shalom, V'reidev Shalom, and that is the 8th level of Chesed that the Ramak brings, Havas Shalom Bein Adam L'Chaver. So what we did was we went through the 8 levels and took so far, I'm going to give you a little more in depth next week in Mitzvah Hashem. We took the simple message. By doing these chasadim, you're zocher to Hashem giving you chasadim. And he enumerates what the chasadim are, and in terms of practical lemaisa, you know, these are the chasadim we should be involved in. But I'll spend a little bit of time. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because it's actually very, very complicated, and he's not marich on it. He's very makatzer here, strangely enough, because he talks about it in other svarim. He's going to connect these chasadim to various unifications in the Sfiros, that there are specific kavanas. When you do one type of chesed, you're trying to create one type of unification. When you're doing another type of chesed, you're trying to create a different type of unification. So I'll spend a little bit of time just going over at least some of those differential kavanos that the Ramak talks about. Okay, have a good Shabbos.
Thank you for listening to this Awesome Ech production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.